have about advocacy, or they feel like they can't do it, is because they feel like that it takes a certain persona or person to do it, but it's not. We all have that in us,
Right.
because essentially, especially for those that are moms, we are teaching our kids, and we want to teach our kids to be self advocates.
Right.
And first, you do have to be an advocate for yourself. Then you learn that, and you, it's not that it's totally prerequisite, because essentially it's kind of happening like simultaneously while you're doing it.
Right.
You know, it's pacing with that, like your mastery of self, and whatever else that you're doing in the world, whatever, you know, is that you're called to do, whether it's, you know, career, job driven, or whatever your personal interest is, or if it is in the realm of advocacy or philanthropy or anything like that, you're sort of, you know, you have to, in order to level up in those areas, you're focusing on here. So it's a lot of internal work, because it is like this war you are with yourself. So, you know, when I felt, and I didn't define it at that time as this, but when I, you know, was 8 years old, and my parents had been divorced since I was 3 at this time. So we're talking about like about 4 years of, you know, shared guardianship, you know, custody. And so I was going with my dad on the weekends, and or every other weekend. I don't even remember what it was, but my dad was a he was a severe alcoholic and a very abusive man. And the last weekend I had spent with him, I was like, I can't go back there. And to be 8 or 9 years old and making that decision, and then putting your neck out to say to your mom, hey, I'm not going back there. So I don't care what needs to happen. I'm not going back there, because the next time I literally remember saying to her, next time you're going to see me, I don't know how you're going to see me and what kind of form I'm going to be in. And I think that is very dangerous. So why that seems, you know, that could seem very developmentally not appropriate for a child to be having to make those decisions. But again, exercising that was the first time. And also my mom being receptive to it and standing in that with me was a very big part of that. And so that started.
But that was you advocating for yourself. Like, right. I'm not going to put up with it. Like, I'm not staying in this.
I can't. Right. Because it, you know, I mean, a little 9-year-old girl, you know, measured up a 200 pound, 6 foot man is not, I'm not winning anything here. So like, I'm not going to win in that fight. I'm not a ninja. So I just,
and you shouldn't have to be in that, you shouldn't have to be in that situation. So.
And you know, and there are a lot of kids that don't even have the privilege to be able to separate themselves from that situation. It's where their parents may still be together, or they are a foster kid. And so learning your own level of advocacy just by like being thrown into the fire at a young age, that type of adversity can benefit you. You know, even though it also is very traumatic. And I'm not going to kid you and say that like there wasn't a lot of work I've had to do to work through those stages, but it did prepare me, and it gave me a lot of insight, which stumbled into, you know, further along. And once I became an adult, and my sister was struggling horribly with substance abuse. And so she overdosed at 35, and my nieces were 12 and 14. And I became, you know, one of their guardians. So I was sharing guardianship with my brother-in-law, their father. And so here I am, like helping with these girls, and making them, I mean, I was a young adult, I was 24, and I'm starting out my career heavily in the event and catering world. And but I was determined to take them with me. I wasn't going to let them sink. And I
Right. So it
knew,
wasn't like a either or. You were like, no, this is an and in both. Like I
right.
want
It isn't right. It's an and in both. And no matter what I had to do, I was going to get them to a certain spot.
yeah. Do you
And
think a
that was
part of that was because of what you had already experienced as a child, that
right.
same kind of, even though it wasn't you that was in that particular situation as a child, but it was that same mechanism of somebody's got to protect them, the same way you felt when you went to your mom and said, hey, I got to protect me, right?
Right. And so, and they really weren't, they're, and losing a parent, and then under the circumstances in which they lost that parent, there was so many layers of complexities that we had to navigate and still navigate as a family.
Yeah.
But that was a stepping stone to now where I've arrived in my life now with my own children.
Right.
Now my husband and I have our own children, and that set me up for that. And I should also mention, and even though it didn't have anything to do with me, but it is very much aligned with my work now as a public servant and looking at the education system. My mom was a foster kid, and was removed from her home when she was 7. So, there's sort of this, there's this interwoven,
Yeah, I was gonna say it's almost
systemic,
like, we talk about the journey, right? So it's
right.
almost like
There's
the
this,
journey it's connected. Like we always say, that use the phrase things happen for a reason. And
mm-hmm,
it doesn't mean that we always agree, nor does it mean that it is something that we always like, the things that do happen, right?
right.
But they do happen for a reason when you take the time to look back at how every
Oh,
step led to the next chapter, right? And
right. And
from your story, it definitely sounds like
right.
all
And
these
why
things.
you're in the thick of it, and why
Yeah.
you're feeling your lowest low and your deepest pain, you're like, why am I here? I hate this. I can't stand it. I don't want to be in this. But it's through that you end up having this growth and
Yeah.
epiphany,
Yeah.
and not that I would ever want uh, my a child to experience what my mother had to, but because of that, I have that connection and that understanding.
Mhm.
So there's been this evolution, and I can look at 4 generations of women, because my sister was 11 years older than me. So I had my mom, and then my sister,
Mhm.
myself, my sister, my nieces, and now the phase that I'm in now, and how that gives me such deep insights to what, and me being able to see what other people's struggles are and what their obstacles are, and how we can create better systems. And so, my son is autistic.
Right. Those are
He's
both
speech
wonderful.
delayed, and also has ADHD, so he's combined type brain. He was non-speaking, but he has language now, and he,
That's awesome.
it all continues to develop, but it takes, because the world is not set up in a place to give automatic supports. There are a lot of obstacles. This takes a lot of mitigation, and through that lens too, I was also able to immediately see, and it wasn't that I also didn't see it in my own journey. Like, by the time that I reached adolescence, and I told someone this story the other day, I noticed that why I was still struggling being a, a white person, why was I kind of overcoming some of these things, why my friends who were Black and maybe having similar circumstances or worse were not, right? Like, so I
Oh,
started
you
to
had that
see that,
awareness. You started having
but
that
there,
awareness.
right, there was that awareness, but there wasn't a way to define. I didn't because no one was having those conversations,
Yeah.
there was no way to define exactly what that was. You could see that there's something wrong, like, but I couldn't label what it was exactly. And I couldn't really hone in on what it was. But in the meantime, I was an individual that can and does like to hold space for other people. And empathy is also.
You just took the word right out of my mouth. I was going to say, life struggles will, and I hate to even call them struggles, because I do believe that our wounds are I call them our beauty marks, because I do believe that they make you beautiful once they've healed, right? Or in the process of them healing. But the empathy part is so important. And I feel like that is also what it teaches you, is empathy. You can't go, not when you don't go through anything, how can you understand empathy if you've never gone through anything?
Right. And I also am learning something too, in some of like the conversations I'm having amongst, whether it be, my family or friends, or again, like my fellow board members, you're seeing where the limitations are in their conversations of depth. And some of it is not saying, sometimes the assumption is that they're not able to be empathetic, the depth may not be there, but it's, do they let themselves go there?
That's good.
Is it, because I'm asking, I asked another board member, I was like, do you think it's that because they didn't have any trauma? Is it possible to go 80 years of your life and not experience something that was traumatic or a struggle for you to overcome? And his point of view was like, there are those people that have lived life in a bubble. And I'm like, really? So I have a very hard time grasping that there is just perhaps people that have been insulated from all of these things for that long. That again plays into the whole conversation of like what whitewashing is. In that same arena, but like,
but is it that they haven't gone through anything, or is it that they have not confronted or been
right,
gone through the process of really being truthful about what they have gone through? Because I think one of the things this pandemic has shown us is that a lot of us have suppressed a lot of things because we didn't want to deal with them, internally, what's inside of us, right?
Right.
It's easy for us to deflect and move about our daily business, outward business, without having to really take time to look at our own stuff, right?
Right.
And I feel like, to your point, I have a hard time, swallowing that, the pill of I didn't know, or I don't know, to a degree, right? Because I do understand that there are, ways of living that provide differences that maybe were not the norm or the standard for you versus somebody else. If you grew up in a suburb versus an urban area, you probably had a very different experience, right?
Right.
So I get that those things do shape who we are and what we and what we know. But I think there comes a time, which I think that's what you're kind of alluding to, is that there does come a time though where you have to own your awareness or lack thereof.
Right. And it's not an excuse for then for not being responsible enough to then make yourself aware. Right. And especially if you are in a position as being a public servant, we have to have accountability in that area, and especially in the area of education. Because those making those decisions need to have a range of lenses. It does take multiple lenses, right? And that's the benefit of those types of positions, like in the position that I'm in. But the individuals themselves in order to really evaluate and assess the decisions you're about to vote on or make
Right.
suggestions is also not taking things at surface level. You can't take things just at face value, just like for the reason that you said. We could say, well, she said she's okay,
Yeah.
but is she okay?
Right. Right.
Right. And like, and
What are the
asking,
behaviors that you're
right,
seeing or
asking the word why
Mhm.
and all of that stuff. And one thing that has, and I don't want to skip ahead. Hold on. Let's see.
No, you're you're okay. But
I want to
actually,
make,
this is a great segue into into the next part of our discussion, which is, because you're talking about how we do have to hold our particularly our education, system accountable, to understanding that we have a responsibility to all our children, right? All of our kids, no matter their color, no matter if they have a stigmatism, no matter if they have, whatever shade, color, that they come in, it's a responsibility to all, and we're charged with holding them accountable as well. So in that same breath, I do want to talk about, the fact that this is around the time where you and I met, because of some of these challenges that we're currently talking about. I think most, unless you're hiding up under a rock somewhere, most are aware that we are coming upon, the 1 year death of and murder of George Floyd. And it was during that time last year that, Moms Who Lead with Love was created, was founded, I should say, which is a nonprofit. I actually am the co-founder of it, and Jean was one of the moms who actually became a part of it very early on, very quickly, to help with some of the advocacy work that we are still in the process of doing. But let me say, much of our mission, to Jean's point, is in the education arena, making sure that, we are looking at how some of our educational systems are just not serving our babies well. They're letting them down in some ways, and also helping our moms, moms who don't have the access to the resources, right? You mentioned earlier about your son having autism and having to advocate for him, and understanding that you had to go out and find the resources, stir the pot, do whatever you need to do, right? And I know that we have a lot of moms who are in those shoes too, who may not understand what to do, when to do it, or what is even available to do it, right? And so that's a big part of our mission too. But I say all that to say, advocacy work takes time. It takes time and a lot of patience, right?
right. Because
And
what we wanted it like yesterday.
like,
And
and it was needed like yesterday.
right, right. And getting there is not so easy.
Yeah,
And it's exhausting.
yeah,
This is
yeah,
very laborsome. It's physically laborsome and it's emotionally and mentally laborsome.
yeah. And I
It's
think that's, a lot of those words you're describing right now are how people are probably feeling right now,
right.
given that we now have had the death just this week of Dante Wright.
Mhm.
And so for many, it's like, here we are again. Is anything working, right? Is this all in vain? Or are we ever going to truly see change, right? Um, so how do you, I guess, I really want to talk through, because we've talked about your journey, and how these things have kind of unfolded as you have gone through your journey, which have
Mhm.
led you every single time kind of back to some lens of advocacy. And so how do you continue to journey, right, when you don't feel like you are seeing the process move forward, or don't feel like, don't feel like you are seeing the process move forward? How have you been able to continue to journey, even through, through some of those stumbling blocks?
I think I cling on to what energizes me is where I have when I'm able to see progress as possible and where you can reflect. And it's not in terms of like racial injustice, but if you're talking about in terms of like your son, my son, or um, something that you really wanted to happen inside of your community, if you've seen where that change and even that little tweak
Mm-hmm.
is there, that gives you a glimpse of what is possible. And it's the possibility that it, and knowing that it is possible, and knowing that what we want others want too,
Mm-hmm.
also carries you. It gives you strength, it gives you energy. When you feel alone and isolated and not seen, it's deflating and isolating. It's depressing. You lose your verve, you lose your vigor, you lose the light inside of you. So it's kind of just like wherever you can cling onto that light, you cling onto it and lean hard into it. And so I think that's one thing that keeps me going, is that I know it's possible to do better. Like, and I live that. Like, I feel like it's not of, I know we're not there yet.
Yeah.
I know it's possible to be better. Like, and kind of just, it's like holding that demand, setting that expectation, and then you just keep working and pushing against that expectation until it is met. And then you move that needle even further.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's one thing from a mindset standpoint that I do. And from what really I've always been, I started doing work and looking introspectively, like I said, even kind of earlier on as a teenager, but then into my adulthood. And as I was an event planner, we both were event planners. So that's the other crazy thing, is like, we lived within a small, we lived in like similar zip codes at one point, and we were not,
I know, that's so
we
crazy.
weren't talking. We had similar vendors, and so we were kind of networked together that way. That made this part of our journey kind of easily merge together. Like, hey, I know this person and I'm going to pull them in, and this is great because we also have this other level of common ground and understanding. But I was doing an event. I had a client that always was doing heavy philanthropic work, and really loved doing things that were always driven towards education, and equity, and trying to build, to just make things available to all kids and all parents. And so she wanted to do one of our events and have this NPR speaker and author of he wrote a book called The Hidden Brain, and it's all about implicit bias. And so it's not a book about necessarily about racism, but the whole concept and study of racism in that work, and how people get elected. I mean, it really is just, it was a great stepping stone into that conversation. And from there, and even from the event that I got to work with him, one, it helped that I read the book. It helped that I tuned into some of the way that he spoke, because we're always like, how do we deliver the impact that we need to get, especially the event was a 1 hour event. We're trying to pack everything in there in 45 minutes, including food and all of that. And we were raising money for 2 different entities. So not only did he have to blend in his work and examining these 2 different entities and how, like, purposing it around that, but he also was able to demonstrate implicit bias through the menu that we composed. And it was in a real-time exercise. You can't escape it at that moment. You're in the situation and you're starting to examine that you have biases. And so again, you're starting to peel back that layer there, right? And and in that book,
let me just say right there, I think, one of the things that I hear you saying is that you've placed yourself in situations, right? Because I think you have to make a conscious effort on purpose to place yourself in certain situations if you truly want to do this work.
Right.
You can't be confined to the comfort of your bubble. You have to be willing to go outside of it and stretch beyond it and just get super uncomfortable, to be honest.
Right. You have to make the decision to say, I want to know what I don't know.
Right.
Like you have to say, I'm definitely, and I think.
And then once you do know, what are you going to do with it?
Right. What are you going to do with it? How does it do that? And where I felt maybe where all of those years where I spent in the hospitality business, wow, it wasn't all for nothing, because that gave me such a range of experiences of people from all walks of life, where whether I liked it or not, if I didn't know about somebody's specific religious preferences or like rituals and why that was important, I needed to do that in order to make them that they felt comfortable and safe if they were going to be in this hotel, in this room, break this bread with these people, like whatever it is I needed to do to merge those things. I tasked myself with that because I was going to end up with a better result, but I was also truly vested in it and engaged in wanting to know what I didn't know. And so I think
that's where we have to do better is wanting to know what we don't know.
Right.
No matter whether it makes us uncomfortable, no matter whether it shatters the world that we thought we lived in, because it can be earth shattering to realize some of the deep rooted things that you believed in, or the things that you really thought were one way or another. That can be earth shattering, but it does us no good to live in false identity versus authenticity and what is real.
And just for the sake of your own comfort, to risk perpetuating harm to other people.
Right.
Like it's not okay. And you can't, and there's this like desire that some people want to keep it at arm's length. Right. They want to think that they can walk within a certain boundary and keep themselves at arm's length from it. And that's not it. And I'm engaging in those very deep conversations specifically with people on my board. And it's really, it's throwing some of them.
How are you, to whatever degree you're at liberty to talk about it.
Right. Yeah. So let me give you a little basis about some school board business in general, just so I think a lot of people, I think the whole idea of board of trustees and school board individuals needs to be demystified, because really I encourage everyone to get involved with this process and learn what it's all about and what their jobs are to do, and what your job as a community member.
What position do you hold on the?
Right. Yeah. So I am. I'm a board of trustee for my district. Our district has 7 board members. We are not a single member district. So meaning like you don't have to belong to I don't represent one specific part of the community. None of us do, right? We represent everyone. But there is some, I would say, definitely do some work and research on what is the difference between, single member, because I didn't really know. Even as I was campaigning, I learned very close to the very end that I was like, wow, that's a thing. Like that is something to definitely consider,
Yeah.
especially if you're in a very large district, and a district that has very defined lines of different communities, that may be something to consider, and what the pluses and minuses of that are. So that's something to examine. So I'd never wanted to be a politician. Let's get right there. I do not have a political science degree. I'm not a poli-sci major. I was never an educator myself, but I've always been passionate about education. Um, and I'm a systems person. I have a lot of, again, personally lived experience as well as like professional experience that gives me, you know, I, I had to embrace that I can do this, because I
Yeah.
was like, well, who am I to do this? Right. Like,
And how
why?
many times do we do that?
Right.
Say, well, who are you to
Right.
think that you can go and do X or
Right.
do Y? So I
Right.
appreciate you saying that, because I think it's important for people to know that you didn't come from a background of politics. You didn't, it's not like you've been revving up for this all your life. Like this is something that you saw a problem and you
Mm-hmm.
decided to go be the
Right.
solution.
So I was navigating some personal grievances I was having with the district in terms of special education and why that was happening. There was a rezoning about taking place. And this was, again, before the George Floyd incident had occurred, but it was fresh and alive to me. I started to see the writing on the wall. I saw it once I was oversold on the idea that the area in which we lived in which I live in, North Austin, for those that don't know. And I'm not originally from here. I'm originally from the East Coast. I am not a Texan, though my license now says that I am. I am a, Baltimore, Maryland girl. Yeah, like that is still very much who I am, very much part of the fabric of who I am. And they I saw once we moved into this district that it was like, oh, wait, it's not really inclusive,
Mm.
diverse, maybe, and
Mm.
learning that again, like we need to bring the distinction, but what diversity is and what inclusion is.
Yes.
And that is, they are not the
Very
same thing.
different things,
They're
right?
very different things, but people love to tout, well, we're diverse.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And so is the rainbow, and I can see all of the colors. But that does not mean that it's all inclusive of one another, and that
Right.
red understands yellow and vice versa. But anyway, and that's probably maybe a horrible analogy, but still, like,
No,
again,
that
like
was
it's
great.
proximity. Like,
Mhm.
well, we're standing next to each other, but how are we really including? So I was starting to personally experience that. And at the same time, I'm observing how the rest of the community was interacting together, and where there wasn't really inclusiveness and communications that were going out, like starting to just pay attention to this. But when that rezoning thing came up, there were two items on the ticket for what was being contended as resolutions. And it was basically, it was minorities and special ed. And I'm
Mm.
like, how? Okay, like lots of red flags. And
Yeah.
my husband was like, well, maybe you should run for the school board. And I'm like, first off, I don't even have time. I can't even leave the house because of my children and my son, like his situation. He just is very highly anxious, and it still is, it's a big struggle for us right now.
I'm
It's one
sure.
of the things that's probably the most distressing challenge that we're encountering as a family, is still trying to figure out how we're going to resolve and remedy this and get my son through this,
Mhm.
because this work is so important. It is not only impacting him, but it's impacting so many.
Yeah, so many other kids.
But people soon after that, my husband said that someone posted, oh, seats 6 and 7 are up for election. So I was like, all right, well, let's go find out what this is about.
Right. And let me back you up. So and I want to make this clear to the audience, because some mom out there, or some parent may be thinking about this, or this may be on your radar. So I want to drive home the point that, number one, we got to figure out, or not figure out, but we have to be tapped into what's going on in our school districts. You just made the point of, you saw that there were disparities. You saw that things were not, equal across the board. You saw that there was, diversity, but not inclusion. So we got to be tapped into what is going on at our local level and not just at the higher up. A lot of people are tuned in when we're talking presidential elections, but
right.
if we asked each other, well, who's on your school board? Who's on your board of trustees? Would we be able to answer those questions?
I didn't know.
Right. Well, and neither did I. Prior to this year, neither did I. And so I think that's so important to bring up, because those are the people that are directly impacting the decisions that are impacting our children.
Yes, they are. And it's, even though, we're not in the classroom, we're making decisions that impact what happens in the classroom.
Yeah.
You may not see it show up tomorrow. Sometimes you do, depending on it's something that was voted upon that has to, go into play right away. But like long term, you're talking about strategic planning.
Yeah.
You have several levels, and even inside of your campuses, like here in our district, I've learned we have different committees for things. You don't have to be on the PTA or PTO. There is a committee here for establishing you have your CAC, your campus goals, your campus strategic goals, and campus strategic planning. You have that inside of the overall strategic goals for the entire district. Right. So there's several areas in which can chip away at all of these things, and we can get to a place collectively. Mm-hmm. We can't occupy all lanes. We have to decide where we want to be most effective, where we feel like, again, this has been a huge growth opportunity for me, because I renounced any possibility of doing anything political. And I would never, ever say,
why do you think that was, Jean? Why were you so dead set against it? Was it the stigma of that, or what did you think? What was
I think the stigma, and and also just it opened you up. You completely abandon the, people can say whatever they want about you. Yeah. You're basically, you're a public figure now. Yeah. You have to, you can't, you basically give up the defamation
is in the light.
Right. So like stepping into there, it creates another level of vulnerability that I was like,
it does.
That's very uncomfortable, and I am not doing that. Right. But as we see,
you are,
you need to be like,
yes.
We all need to be, we all have something to contribute. I truly, totally believe that everyone has value and has something to contribute, and everybody's voice is valuable. And so from that, I was thinking there's lenses not being considered in these decision making, and they're purposely either being excluded or they don't know that they're excluding them, and really examining what that is. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. I have no idea what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I can't campaign. It's also COVID. We're in a pandemic. Like, what is the roadmap for this?
Right.
What do you do?
Did you find a book on campaigning during COVID?
No. And honestly, I mean, some people were like thinking, oh, you have all this free time during COVID. I'm sorry. Like, my kids were doing tele-ed and teletherapy, and like, there was a whole nother
for school board office.
Right. I'm like, you can't go door to door. So I had to figure out another way to connect with people. And because I had established a presence on social media, and I had that comfortability of using that platform, that became the way that I was able to do that. And so there was a very unconventional way in which I did it. And I just was like, you know what, instead of me trying to like contrive and like do things how everybody's tried to do them to make it, I'm like, I'm just going to be me. And if I end up in this position, great. No matter what, I was like, it was still worth it to do it because one, I needed to learn. I made some type of impact because there was a voice and certain things being said that weren't before being considered. So even if that was the very minimum,
if you one, like at least you have now brought again the awareness that there's a problem with the way that we've been doing things, right? Because you don't bring awareness to things that are that work.
Right.
You usually are bringing awareness to things that don't work or aren't working as they should, right?
Right. You know, it's normally not something that you're like, oh, I really just think I want to retire. And maybe this was the very old school esoteric way of doing things. And I'll retire and I'll just, you know, be on the school board. But it's not like that right now. I mean, it is in a way a battle zone. You don't want a divided board. That's not a good look. So you do have to learn how to have, you know, civil and Socratic conversations and but a lot of school boards and local governments aren't doing that, just like they aren't doing that on the federal level either. So I think one of the things that was
lessons though and nuggets from what you're saying, you know, that even if we peel back the onion, it's, you know, not getting in your own way, number one. Number two, getting outside of the thought of, you know, how am I supposed to do that, right? And not conforming to how it's always been done, but doing it your way. And that's what you did. You know, you did it your way, but you also were able to stay authentic to yourself in doing it your way. Like I remember seeing you in some of your videos and pictures, and you would have your daughter with you, you know, and I'm like, that's so amazing because that is who you are, you know, and you're showing her in the process, like you can go after things, like you can go after the things that mean something to you. You don't have to just sit back and take whatever is
right. You don't have to be complacent and but whatever, you know, however the world is tugging and pulling at you and towing line. But I think the most and I, you know, even though I like did that my own way, you know, once you are elected and you're on like city council or board, and I would say in our state in Texas, the school boards, you run nonpartisan. So you're not, you aren't declaring I'm a Democrat or a Republican. I think in some states it is like that. And so, but I like the fact that it's not. It's also not a paid position. I also like that because that is equalizing because there's no incentive for the board members to make certain decisions because of the way their pockets are lined and how they were voted, who elected them, right? It takes that part out of it. So it is that it does take an extra something to say I'm going to do that.
Well, that's what I was going to say. But to your point, if it's not a paid position, then essentially this is you giving a whole lot of your time for something, you know, obviously for something that you truly, truly care about, something that you truly believe in making a difference in and championing, say that so fast. This cause and, you know, what needs to change. But I think it's a great way for us to segue into my next question, which is when you're giving so much of yourself, you know, and you are, I mean, because you're, you know, working as a trustee, a school board official, but then you also have your family life, your kids, your wife. You have your son who is autistic, who you also, you know, are trying to advocate for on that level. Where do you fit in yourself, particularly your self-care? Because all of those things that you are championing, you have to find a way to continue to feel you. So talk to me about, girl, where, how, and because I know that that's a big part of who you are as well. And I'm glad that, again, the awareness is there that you have to do that. But I think a lot of times for those of us who do, enter this world of advocacy, and for those who don't, we still have to understand that even through these ups and downs of the things that enter our universe, right?
Mm-hmm.
We got to find a way to still take care of ourselves.
Right. So, it's about, to me, self-care is about boundaries. So every time I take on a new thing, and I still am kind of like, I'm in that phase of like recalibration in my life with my board responsibilities of rerouting, but then there's also like, the non-negotiables.
Mm-hmm.
My non-negotiables are, I'm going to wash my face and take care of my skin, because there's anything that where my life stress and all of that was showing up, it was showing up outwardly. Mm-hmm. I was burning myself into the ground. And after attending my first parent-to-parent conference for special needs families, and I'm looking around the room, and a lot of these have been long-term advocates. They have adult children with disabilities. And I'm like, oh my gosh, is that my destiny? Again, not judgment, but I could tell that those women were completely neglecting themselves. I appreciated what they were giving to us, but they were neglecting themselves. And mostly women, because honestly, in that there are men that are shouldering that level of advocacy and taking the lead with that for their child, and some because there isn't a mother to do so. But majority of us in that space are all moms. And so like how I was like, how are they doing all of that? And I just had to, it was a reflective moment. And I'm like, I really need to take better care of myself. And also knowing that my physical health is empirical to this. And so it's been an evolution, of like paying attention to my health. Like right now, what I'm doing, I'm doing a whole cleanse of like, I was having candida overgrowth, and I've had this at different times in my life, but I think it gotten to a severe place because of COVID. Mm-hmm. I really became not mindful. I was less mindful of what I was eating and drinking and consuming.
Right.
And it really just got out of hand. And so I'm like, whoa, I need to get my gut back, my gut health back in shape, because it was also affecting my brain, my mind, other parts of my physical health.
Our body is all interconnected.
So. Yeah. And so like, so I guess I pick what I'm prioritizing at that moment, and realizing that I can't do all of the things, but what is it that I can do? And one of the things that I was missing, and part of what Moms Who Lead with Love also helped me do, because that fulfilled and gave me, an assist, and it still does. Like, even though I'm not active on the visionary committee at the moment, I am still paying attention to what's going on the page and what we're doing as a community, and topics and articles that are shared. That is something that I'm still carrying with me into these conversations that I'm actively having right now. Like, you guys are with me in that boardroom. Like, you're with me in that boardroom. You're with me sometimes when I go into the executive session of that boardroom and talking to my board members and saying like, no. And so that's a really powerful feeling to know that from your little idea that you had to start this thing, is having that level of impact and that rippling effect. And so, but what I also needed inside of, I didn't have that connection. I had a mentor, in terms of like, as an autism mom, but so many of us just didn't have our people. We didn't have a community to immediately dial into. And I've recently found that, and that has been
awesome.
so enriching to my life and my mental health.
Yeah.
And I think when when in any level of advocacy, I find that we find the problem. We are so eager to hastily want to attack that problem and resolve that problem. And we think it's so acute, right? We are attacking this as an acute thing and not realizing that, well, we need to take a step back and say, what do I need to do to support myself on this venture?
Right.
Now that I'm going to do.
It's a marathon. It's not it's not a sprint, which, I know, we thought it was, I wouldn't say we thought it was, but it's that urgency to want to fix, to want to, make it better, to want to, make it go away, to want to solve it, right?
To extinct it, to stop it right now.
Exactly. And so it's that urgency that makes you, like you said, want to attack it, like literally throw everything at it that you got. And then you're like exhausted afterwards, like, and then wondering, well, why didn't it do what we thought it was going to do?
That wasn't exactly the outcome that I thought. And sometimes you may feel like you're like, oh, wait, like it's even created more obstacles for us. Like it can feel like you have lots of setbacks on these journey. You're like, and you feel like, oh God, I like can't do this. But wait, it is when you get confronted to that moment, you're like, okay, the thing I would say is like, what do I need to support myself through this? But you do need community.
Yeah,
you need community. And so my communities are, outside of how I operate inside of the board, and my family or my lifelong friends are now like Moms Who Lead with Love. And now my autism mom group, which we've now created a community because we've understood that need is there. So now we have Moms Talk with Autism, and we launched that this week or last week. I can't remember which week we did, but anyway. And so, but that has, it's in, and the feedback we're getting and how quickly it's growing is because that tells us there's a need for that. There's a need. And so you're like, well, that fills you up and that can keep you going, but also knowing that we're not doing it alone. I'm not doing it by myself. I'm not saying like we have each other to do. And then we also are encouraging other people to say, grab your people, find your people. It's so it is. And if there's anything that COVID has taught us, and I think we all thought this, when we went in, we're like, oh, it's only gonna be a couple of weeks and then life's gonna resume, right? Like people were like, this is just this period of time. And meanwhile, I'm like, I don't think so, but you guys all think that. But that's how, and everybody was like giving all of their things. You're like, I'm the best mom in the world. I've got the best in-home classroom set up. I've got my systems down. I'm like, we got a schedule. We got a routine. We're like,
don't talk about me. Don't talk about me. Okay. Don't talk about me.
That was everybody. That was everybody. We all go into these things thinking it's this acute thing, but now I think we're all like, oh no.
Yeah. And that's exactly how advocacy is too. You walk into it thinking, oh yeah, we got this, right? And you do, but that mindset shift has to shift to understand that this is and I remember one of our panelists saying earlier on that this is a slow walk. You're going to keep walking, but it's a slow walk. It's not a run. And that will stick with me forever in terms of advocacy work, because it is a slow walk, but it's those things that you mentioned, the community, seeing the little things when somebody asks for advice, when somebody has a light bulb moment where they're like, okay, I get it now. It's those things that keep you on the walk and don't just make you stop.
Right. And like, let's even take your community, the Moms Who Lead with Love community, for an example here. Like the beauty of the fact that there is a group of individuals that also continues to grow. It's not limited to where it started. Absolutely. But that doesn't, it's just because I took a step back from my role, it didn't stop what was going, right? Like it kept going. And that's the beauty of like finding the community and building the community, because that gives you the flexibility of those circumstances. So you're not just doing it by yourself. It is
and you don't get exhausted. Yeah.
Right. And like recognizing when someone's like, you know, if you see someone like overdoing, like, okay, let's take a pause. It's okay. You don't need to be all the things and everything all the time. And I do, you feel
holding space for people, you know,
right. And you feel guilty. I mean, you feel guilty. You're like, I don't want to burden other people because I'm taking a step back. There's a lot of guilt, especially because us moms have that by nature.
We already have our own, own strides that we have to overcome just with being
right.
But, I think the community part is so key, like you said, because the community, what I'm figuring out is the community holds space for you. And so when you do have those days where, like you said, you need to take a step back, or you're like, you know what, today, not today,
Right. Or like when you have the, with Dante Wright's death, like how triggering that is and how that reopens where we're not still out of the woods with the other thing. And now we're being like injured again in the same exact place, right? Inside of the community. And like, that's really painful. And I've engaged these conversations before the incident happened, because we were having a workshop meeting 2 weeks ago. And our community has been very engaged in the conversation about equity and inclusion and diversification inside of our district. And I've been like a conduit for that feedback and giving, my contribution to our meetings and decision making, and putting that lens. And then we have 2 Black board members on the board, but also what I was observing is that they've been on the board longer than I have, obviously. And the conditions inside of the board, there was still this like line that I saw them walking just to try to hold their position, right? And because I've had some talks, been able to talk to them one-on-one recently and say, like, you don't need to code yourself with me, and I don't want you to tiptoe around something you feel strongly about and that needs to happen. And our community needs that voice, but also holding space for him and her to also give me feedback for like what it is like for them to say, like, yeah, and then also this and that. And like, so now we're having a more meaningful conversation, and also seeing where our lenses are and where we can give impact and why this is important. Or maybe like, I wasn't thinking about it like that. Because we can't all meet together. The only times we really can have discussions as a board is when we have those meetings. Because if you have 4 or more, I think it's 4 or more board members, it's a quorum, and it has to be documented, and because we have a large district, it has to be videoed, it has to be streamed, like all of that stuff. But when you're on a board, you're not a unilateral decision maker. You're just a vote. You're a vote, and we're an oversight committee, and your city council is an oversight committee. And these are things I didn't, because I wasn't a poli-sci degree, probably, I didn't know that was a thing. But it doesn't mean because we don't have that degree that it's not our responsibility as citizens to know that that's the power that those individuals have. And it's not to say because they don't have a unilateral power that they still don't have power, because they certainly do. We certainly do. We have huge impact. But knowing that you get elected to the board doesn't mean you come in and you just shake everything up and everybody, falls in line. That is not how that works either. So
and most things don't work that way. but I do appreciate you opening up that dialogue just so that the audience can understand, where some of these things can impact them directly, you know. And because, you know, there may be moms, you know, mompreneurs, just, you know, women in general who, even at a higher level, just thinking, getting outside of the scope of, hey, you know, I could never do that. Well, you don't know. You don't know until you are willing to change how you look at yourself, or change about your thoughts about how you can step into that, right? Because if that is what your journey is leading you to, just like it has led you here, then I think that's one of the most powerful things that I want the audience to take away from this, from our time together. Because I'm looking at the clock here, and unfortunately we're winding down because the time goes by so fast always when we are having these conversations, because they're so plentiful, they're so good.
But it's a vortex.
Like, I know.
I mean, like,
it's like, how does the time go by so fast? But but you know, it's really understanding that you can step into the things that you are called and led to do. And every little bit of our journey is leading us somewhere. You know, we don't always know exactly where, but it is leading us somewhere. And so our job is to not have all the answers, because we won't and we don't. But it is to keep ourselves continually open to the fact that these things, if they are leading us in a direction, then we owe it to the belief, to the identity, and to the calling to step into it.
Right.
And I love that you have stepped into this. You are one of the most fierce mamas, the most fierce advocates that I know, that I've come to know in a very short amount of time. But your heart is gold, and you know, and you are truly about, you know, inclusiveness of
right.
of all.
Right. And I think that also answers one of your questions that you had for me too, is like, how do you see yourself how do you make yourself an ally, not only an advocate? And I think it is the holding space for people. And being like, disarming, like, I don't want you to give me a performative version of yourself or a buffered version of yourself. Like, you can just be yourself. Like, I'm going to be me. You should be you. Like, we can still walk the parameters of like making sure that we are, you know, being, especially in terms of like talking with your as board members and being that, because you do learn like, well, once you're a board member, even though you took that hat off, that hat doesn't come off. And knowing like you still have to walk a certain line to make sure that you are being legislatively compliant within your role. And that's a huge, like, all of these things. I've done so much training. It's a lot of training. Like, that's another thing no one told you. No one told you, by the way.
I can only imagine.
But I'm here for it. And I love it because it's so insightful and it answers so many questions that I had. And I'm thinking, and then because I'm a systems person, and because I was an event planner, and I look at all those details, and now I can come back and be like, oh, this is why. And this is really insightful, because that also, you know, I can come back to my communities and say, oh, ask this question or do this, and teach people
and pass it
to
on.
Navigate. Right. Like that's the key, is that because you don't want it to be all for nothing. It's not, I'm driven by purpose, not position. I'm not like, oh, I've landed where I want to be.
Like, yes, driven by purpose, not position. Listen, we can drop the mic right there, Jean. Seriously, because that is, you know, that is it right there. So listen, I want you to tell everyone, where can they find you? How can they stay in contact with you, especially if there are women out there who are maybe thinking about this direction, or are just really inspired and want to stay connected with you, you know, and your journey? How can they find you and stay connected with you?
So I guess I have 4 platforms here. So this one is my main one. So my Jean Mayer accounts are my Just Jean on Instagram _Wade Mayer. That's like my main general account. But I also have an account for my, like, as a trustee, and also Twitter. as trustee mayor. And then I have Moms Talk Autism. So if you are a special needs parent in that realm, and that's where you need to get dialed in that community, like boom, go right there. And I also, I have other like social selling platforms, and I also have like an athleisure company. So there's many ways to find me. I think you can even just Google it. And so I have my email, 2 email addresses. So I have my trustee email address, jean.mayer@pfisd.net. And then my main email, which is jean@justjean.co is correct, not .com. Don't correct it. I have to say that all the time. Unfortunately, I couldn't buy the .com domain. No one wants to give it up. That person uses it, and .com gets a lot of my emails. I mean, she gets real mad.
I'm sure if they just type in Jean Mayer, they'll find you too. So
yeah, they can. You've tagged me here, so it's just like you've tagged me here, so that can lead you into
like the rabbit trail.
Right, the rabbit trail. Just follow the hyperlink.
Follow the yellow brick road.
Right.
So before we close out, I always have to close out with my my rapid fire. So 5 questions that I never share with my guests before they come on. So that way, whatever comes to your mind first, that is what you share. I am not responsible for what you say. So.
Oh, wait, is this also, should we call this the Vegas space? Am I stepping into the Vegas zone? Like, am I also not responsible?
It's not as wild as Vegas, but
right. Okay.
We still try to keep it a little tame.
Right.
Okay. So number 1, what do you like to do for fun?
Oh, what do I like to do for fun? Think. I mean, that sounds so crazy, but
no,
like,
it doesn't.
I sound like such a square, but like, I like to be able.
I'm like, girl, you're advocating all the time. When
to be alone.
Right. I was going to say, be alone.
Be alone. I don't care what it is, as long as I'm alone. A favorite thing I do for fun. What's fun? Being alone. I could be alone doing lots of things. It just opens it up.
Just by myself. Me, myself, and I. All right. Number 2, what's one stereotype about moms or women that drives you bananas?
God, there's so many things to pick one thing.
Yep, one.
I guess it's like the predisposition to like what people think our roles are supposed to be, like that we take a back seat, like what we want to do in this world takes a back seat because our little people, and that our whatever our job is as a woman, and whatever our role is, like that's what we're supposed to fulfill. So I think that's probably, that's like when you start doing that to me, I'm like, when someone starts doing that,
tone deaf.
I'm like, no.
I'm with you on that one, girl. So I'm right there with you. Number 3, who is your BFF in your head?
In my head.
I love it how everybody is always stumped. It like brings me so much immense joy.
BFF in my head. Who is my BFF in my head? I would say it's probably like comedian based. Like it's hard for me to just pick one, but like so many of like all the comedians that have been on SNL.
Okay.
You like, those are the people that I think are my BFFs, where I find myself when they're like doing their skits and they're being their personas. I'm like, oh, I could totally be having this conversation with them right now. Like, this is amazing.
That's so good. All right. Number 4, what do you dream of becoming?
A rich philanthropist. I mean, like, when you were like, oh, you should just be comfortable. It's like sitting in a living room with Oprah. And I'm like, well, that would be actually really nice. Like, that's what this space is. This is your stepping stone to Oprahdom.
Look, speak it into existence, girl. I'm here for it.
Yes. Like, a rich philanthropist. I just want to be wealthy and just do shit for people all the time.
All the time.
Right? Like whatever I need to do. Like, what do you need me to do?
And what could be better? Like, seriously.
Right.
Number 5, your favorite song and why?
Who? My favorite song. Like, I feel like in lifetime, like we have like our theme song of the time. The songs that I play.
And it can be whatever, like whatever. First thing that comes to your mind, what is it?
I like, this is such a complex kind of question for me because I have so many songs that are just like speak to me, that are like that.
Yeah, what's one of them? Just one. I know it's so hard. I'm a music lover, so believe me, if I had to answer this question, I would probably be sitting there like you are right now, like what?
I think it was just, and it will be timeless for me, and it never became a like famous song, but it was a Lady Gaga song and Florence and the Machine combo called Hey Girl. And it's so much about the exchange and relationship between women and like seeing one another and supporting one another. It's just a very like soulful, meaningful, like great song, and it never got it wasn't airtime, but I always was playing it on repeat.
Songs are ahead of their time though, I feel like some songs that come out, they get missed because they're ahead of their time. Like people just aren't there yet, they're not ready, and I don't know, maybe that was
yes, I do. Or some people didn't appreciate certain songs of their time, like growing up. I mean, Janet Jackson and Madonna, like those were my favorites, and Rhythm Nation was one of my most favorite songs ever. And in fact, I used to be a dance captain, and we did I choreographed stuff to it. And so like, but knowing that song from that decade plays into what is happening still in the world now. Like I remember feeling so into that song. And then when I'm talking to my friends about some things that I'm dealing with inside of like the board, and I'm like, where you like do role playing and you're like, the song, Free Your Mind, like talking about En Vogue and that song. Like, remember when MTV was just playing that song like crazy, and they were doing it in terms of like talking about politics and elections, and it was still, that conversation was happening then, and how many people were paying attention to the relevance of that? Right. And so I think about that because I was like 10 years old at that time. I was such an En Vogue fan. I remember writing to them. I got a signed thing. I was such a nerd.
Well, yeah, but I think that's, that is, that kind of brings everything full circle, because that is what this past year has shown us is like, when we're not paying attention, there's a lot of things that are being said, but the difference is, are we plugged in? Are we tuned in to what's, to what's really happening? And so
even old rap music. I mean, like all these things were being talked about. Did you guys just were like, oh, the beat's so cool? And I'm like, are you listening to the lyrics?
To the words, yeah.
Like, listen to the words.
Thank you, Jean. This has been amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time to hold space with me today. Thank you guys out there for tuning in. Again, I never take for granted that you guys continue to show up each week and participate. You drop your comments and participate in the conversation. But more importantly, I hope that you always leave better than you came to these conversations, and that they continually add value to you and your life and your space. So once again, thank you guys so much for tuning in. This has been another episode of the Eventful Life TV, Living Out Loud. And remember, you can have it all as long as you're willing to have it on your terms and your time. All right, friends, see you next week. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Bye. Did you stop?